I'm Darren from MRT and welcome back to my channel. So this week we've got something a little bit special also. We've got Tom Jacobs, who has the 1970s Reading Company Crossline layout. It's a beautiful layout that he's building over 5 levels. So he shows us through some of his techniques and how he's come about building this layout level by level. So without further ado, let's get started. Welcome aboard, Tom Jacobs. Tom, you can be found on your Facebook page, which is Tom Jacobs in the 1970s Reading Company Crossline. So thanks for taking some time away from your lovely layout and your family this evening to talk with us on model railroad techniques.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me.
So I've also stumbled across a website, readingmodeler.com. Is that still sort of a blog site about your layout going up? Is that correct?
Yeah, that actually predates the layout. I
Right.
had started that back in about 2007, 2008, as to try and create a
Sure.
repository of information, about the Reading and how to model it for everybody that would be interested in modeling the Reading. Unfortunately, what's happened is, as I've actually gotten into building my own layout, I've had less time to update and pay attention to the website. It's still out there, but unfortunately, it's pretty stagnant as of late.
Yeah.
One of these days, I'd like to get back at it, but for now, I'm too busy working on my layout and, frankly, having too much fun.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite interesting. You start out sort of documenting your journey, I suppose. I saw you did a PDF sort of presentation to an RPM meet, I think it was, some time ago, about your research and everything else. And obviously I got quite a bit of information out of that. So if you're happy, I will link that document at the bottom below, because that sort of documents quite nicely from going through, this is what I want to build, the structure it's going to need to go in, right the way through to almost starting the structure, starting building the layout proper, I suppose. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've actually had the chance to present over the past 6 or 7 years at a number of RPM meets here on the East Coast, and
Sure.
I really like, going to the RPMs and meeting with other prototype modelers and sharing information. It's a really great community, and quite
Yeah, sure.
frankly, it's been a lot of help. As I've been on this ride now for about the past 6 years plus.
Yeah, sure. All right. So tell us a little bit about your modelling history. How did you get into this world's best hobby, as I call it?
Well, it's actually a long story. It goes back several generations. I'm descended from several generations of Reading Railroad employees. My grandfather was a machinist and an air brake inspector, and my great grandfather was a boilermaker. They both worked on Reading steam locomotives at the
Oh,
main
lovely.
locomotive shops in Reading, Pennsylvania, where I was born and have lived all my life. So I kind of, came by this love of trains. Honestly, it's really, in the blood for me. And I got my first train set when I was about 10. It was a Tyco train set I got for Christmas. My dad and I set it up on a piece of drywall in the basement and ran that thing ragged. Then I had the usual, hiatus of girls and cars and
As
everything.
we
But
do. As we do.
right, right. But back in my mid 20s, after my son was born, when my son was about 3 or 4,
Sure.
he was head over heels for Thomas the Tank Engine. So, I thought, well, what a better way than to spend some time with my son than
Yeah.
to buy another train set. And
Yeah.
and so I did that, and from there the bug just kind of bit again, and
Yeah.
I've been modeling in some form or other ever since.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. So it definitely is like that. My daughter, she likes getting out there and helping with the scenery. I've got a son and a daughter. both are 11 and 9, so they love getting out there. If they're not
Oh,
playing
that's a
cubby,
great age.
yeah, even if it's like they're playing cubby houses underneath the layout board, I don't really care. She tells a story of when she was quite young. She went and painted all the substructure and all that pink. So all my board work and all that underneath that you don't see is all pink. So yeah, she was about 4 years of age just before she went to kindergarten. So that was quite. I've just left it as is because it's a little bit of a moment in time that it's quite a nice little thing, I think. So
Yeah,
right,
nice memory.
yeah, it's a lovely memory. You're right. So all right, so the Reading Company Crossline layout is obviously what we're going to talk about because I've done a little bit of research on this layout, and it's just the backstory to this line I think is phenomenal in itself. I don't personally, as an Australian, don't know much the history of it. Obviously, you do because it's got ties to generations gone back, as you've just explained. So, what I'm going to bring up here just quickly, Tom, is a little, I suppose, a map. So it shows the different branch lines and main lines and the like. Can you see that?
I can. Yep.
So can you just explain sort of, I'm going to walk through, obviously this is obviously very early on or part of your research on what you want to model, and then we'll go through how the actual schematic of the layout proper.
Okay, so the Reading, just to give a very brief history, the Reading Railroad, or the Reading Company as it was formerly known, was built with the purpose of hauling anthracite coal from northern central Pennsylvania down to the Schuylkill and Delaware River
Sure.
in Philadelphia, hauling it down to where it could be loaded onto to boats and then go all over the country by water. So if you look at this map, what you'll see, and the Reading was founded and started in 1833. The red line that you see on this map is the original main line from Pottsville through Reading down to Philadelphia. Okay, and then after that original main line was constructed,
Sure.
a lot of these little blue branch lines up toward the top of the map, these were additional lines that were built to further get at coal and connect with other railroads. But basically, all those blue lines are what us Reading fans call the coal region territory.
Sure.
At the same time, the Reading was expanding to the east and to the west on basically an east-west axis, which is this green line, which became known as the Crossline, and this stretched between Allentown in the east and Hagerstown and Harrisburg in the west.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And at those corners, the Allentown was then the connection with the Lehigh Valley, the Jersey Central, and that was the gateway to the east and the north and New England, while Harrisburg and Hagerstown was the gateway to the south and the west. And these little yellow branch lines are just additional branch lines that the Reading built to connect to different places, different major shipping areas like Wilmington in Delaware.
Sure.
And some other places. But what happened as the Reading evolved and we got into the 20th century, the anthracite business, the coal business, actually took on less and less significance. So the importance of these coal region lines gradually started to fade in the second half of the 20th century,
Sure.
while the importance of this east-west cross line became more and more important. And actually today, this line between Harrisburg and Allentown is Norfolk Southern's main east-west freight artery.
Right.
So
okay.
it's still a very busy line to this day.
Yeah.
And so as I was, figuring out the whats and the whens of what I wanted to model, I knew I wanted to model late 60s, early 70s because I prefer diesel to steam for a
Sure.
number of reasons. Um, and also, I could get the second generation diesel locomotives I wanted.
Sure.
This East-West Crossline would give me the modeling variety and the traffic variety that I wanted to model.
Sure.
So that's ultimately what I decided to replicate.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. So what I'll do, I'll scroll through to the next picture I got here. So I've got this
Okay.
off your website. So my understanding, this is level 1, which is the bottom level. Is that correct? Of the 5,
Uh,
the
yeah, yeah,
Allentown
that is.
staging.
Yep.
Yeah,
That is the bottom level of the layout. And so there's actually, it's a little hard to see, but there's actually nine staging tracks. 7 of them are through tracks, and then we added 2 stub tracks that aren't on that diagram.
sure. All right. So we'll
And the
just
way that we designed I worked with a gentleman named Bob Sprague, who has a website, which is bobstrackplans.com. And he and I worked on the design, and the way that we designed both staging yards, Allentown here at the bottom, and then I'm assuming we'll see Rutherford in a little
yeah,
bit.
yeah,
But they're essentially loop to loop, so that a train coming in
sure.
will turn itself and be ready to go out the other end in the
Yeah,
opposite direction. So I can reuse trains multiple times during an operating
yeah.
session.
That's what I've done on my layout, and it seems to be, obviously it takes more space to be able to turn that train around. However, I think the flexibility to be able to get that reuse of those wagons and motive power back out, I think is quite important from my point of view. And you'll find when you're building, not as like trains just running around continuously as well. I can run it sort of a point to point when I'm actually off stage or on stage, I should say, not in my staging. But I think that just to get those trains running as you're building a layout is paramount to keeping the drive going. I think to keep the layout heading in a good direction, I suppose.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. You're so right. We worked today in our normal Sunday work session. We worked about, I would say, 4.5 hours, and then we all kind of completed our tasks, and we all kind of looked at each other and said, "Hey, let's run some trains."
Yeah.
So we spent the last half an hour, 45 minutes. The 3 of us were each running our own train
Yeah.
and trying to run from one end to the other, since we now have that connection built.
Yeah.
And
Lovely.
we were finding things along the way and debugging a couple things. But yeah, it was just a lot of fun, just for
Yeah.
a half an hour, just to throw a couple cars on behind a locomotive and off you go.
Yeah. It's sort of adds purpose to the build day, doesn't it? I think that's what I sort of find running a few trains. That's great. So we're looking at. Please tell me if I'm incorrect here, but level 2, which is the East Penn branch, is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, this is the line that runs essentially between Reading and Allentown.
Sure.
And coming out of Allentown staging in that bottom stretch of track, we come to the town of Albertus, which was a junction with a short branch line that we've represented with 2 tracks.
Yeah, sure.
And then we continue heading west toward Reading.
Yeah.
And when we exit this level, we then go into the helix to go up to the next one.
Right. Okay. We'll do that now. So this is to Reading Yard.
Yep. And the one thing I should mention is that this is actually the layout is actually a mushroom layout.
Right.
So the layout, the level that we just looked at, is viewed from the aisle in the center.
Right. Okay.
Okay. And then the next level and everything above that is accessed from a raised floor going around the room. And so, we stack the levels on top of each other.
Right.
And
I was going to ask that. Obviously you got 5 levels, and what's the height variation? Because I think I've saw some photos that people will see flicking through here at some stage when we get back onto the slideshow about how you've actually built a sub floor effectively.
Yep. So we come out of the Helix, we go through the town of Fleetwood, we come around that peninsula, we get to Beltline Junction down here in the lower section,
Right. Yeah.
and that is a connection. That's where the East Penn and the original main line diverge.
Right.
So I'm able to replicate some of that coal region traffic that still existed with a small 4-track staging yard.
Yeah. Nice. Nice.
But then coming through the belt along the bottom wall, we go through Reading Yard.
Yeah.
And we come out and we come up around the top of the page and we start heading west toward Harrisburg.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. All right. So level 4, the Lebanon Valley, if I've got this in correct order.
Yep, this is the line. This is the line west, and we're now heading west through. This is a lot of farmland, farm country, small town, very rural. We get to the town of Myerstown, which had a very large industry, the Bear Drug Company.
Right.
They have a plant there that's actually still in business, and still they don't receive rail service anymore, but it's still right there along the tracks.
Yeah.
And then we head into Lebanon, which had a number of industries down along the bottom here. There also was a decent size yard there. It was called Horntown Yard. It was called Horntown because there were so many grade crossings as the line went through Lebanon that the engineer was always, blowing the horn for the crossing. So it was very loud. But there was a small yard there that, they would drop cars off to be delivered to all the industries in town. And then as we head out of Lebanon, we head to the last level,
which is the Rutherford staging area.
Yep. But before we get to Rutherford, this top right corner is Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Oh,
and that
the famous chocolate factory.
Exactly. That is where all of the Hershey bars and Hershey Kisses and all that good stuff was manufactured. And the Reading was their principal supplier of freight. The cocoa beans came into Port Richmond in Philadelphia in big burlap sacks, and they were loaded into boxcars off of ships coming from Africa, coming from South America, and they were dumped into these large concrete silos that are still standing today. They were then conveyed over to the factory where they were ground up and they were mixed with sugar and milk and all that good stuff to make chocolate, and then shipped out by rail to, candy stores all over the world.
Yeah, that's Hershey is a very big brand here, definitely. So my family love the Hershey bar, so we'd like to get over there at some stage. We were meant to come to the United States in about a month's time, but recent events have prevented that, unfortunately. So
right. Well, and actually, I only live about 45 minutes away from Hershey. It's a great place to visit. Lots of good stuff to do.
Yeah, lovely.
But so then after we head out of Hershey, we keep climbing, and we get to the town of Hummelstown, which was a small town with a couple industries. Sure. And then we head into the Rutherford staging yard, which again is the West End staging. Similar concept as Allentown in that we can, we can turn the trains around and have them coming out the opposite end, going the opposite direction.
Sure. So how many operators do you envisage to run this layout as if you wanted? If take the COVID out of it, so you can have everyone you want in there.
Right.
How many operators do you foresee that you would like on an operating session?
I'm thinking, between 10 and 12.
Right.
Because Reading Reading Yard is going to be basically along that entire bottom wall of the barn. And so I'll need a yard master there. I'll need an east and a west yard crew. So that's 3 people right there.
Sure.
The dispatcher's 4.
Yeah.
I envision a dedicated switch crew at Hershey. That's 5. And then the other positions would just be, road jobs.
Yeah. Sure.
So that's one of the things that, once we get everything wired and connected and can get all the kinks worked out,
yeah,
that's something I'm actually looking forward to, is kind of doing a shakedown session where I can gauge, how many trains we can have running on the layout at a time,
Sure.
and then how many people we can fit into the building comfortably, and all of that.
So I'm assuming it's all DCC. It's probably a silly question, but some people are still DC orientated. So what sort of command station are you?
I'm running Digitrax.
Digitrax? Okay. So with Wi-Fi, with the wireless throttles, or combination of the both, or?
Yep. I have mostly the duplex setup, but I do have a simplex receiver. So if anybody has an old simplex throttle that they want to bring, they can bring it and use it. But yeah, I'm using duplex, and I have one of the things that I've been working on recently is I've been doing a lot of experimenting with JMRI.
Yeah, okay. I did probably timely you bring that up. I'll just quickly, you put up a video on your Facebook the other day, so just let me... So this is your JMRI. I think you've just put that up just the other day, so can you explain to us what this is?
I just created this last week, and basically what this is it's a control panel for the staging yard up in Rutherford at the west end and the top level. So I'm using Tam Valley Depot servos to drive most of the turnouts on the layout. So the Rutherford is at top level, it's up pretty high. And one of the things that I've found sometimes in dispatching other people's layouts that I've operated on, you can't necessarily count on the road crew to, always accurately throw the turnouts to get into the right staging track. So, what a decision I made was I wanted to have the dispatcher control the staging yard tracks. So
that's a great idea.
Basically what this does is simply you push one of those buttons if you know that a train's coming in and you want that train to go in on a certain track. You push the button and the JMRI automatically lines the turnouts.
Yeah, lovely.
And same on the other end for a train coming out. If you want to bring a train out of track 2, you simply press the button and it lines everything for you automatically.
Yeah. I don't use JMRI. I've got another program called Train Controller, which is, I'm predominantly a European modeler, but so it's very similar to this, however similar but different. But you can do that type of thing. You set up macros and effectively and routes out and schedules and all sorts of other bits, so you don't take some of the thought or the errors out of, I suppose, the operators more than anything when you're coming out of complex or more complex yard, or particularly hidden yards where you can't see whether the turnout's been aligned properly. So I've found that's probably one of the best things I've done. That's we're doing something very similar by the looks. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So.
No, JMRI is a really great program, and it's free. Number one, can't beat that. Right. But it's, it keeps growing and evolving, and really I've only begun to scratch the surface of what's possible. Eventually I'm going to have a full CTC panel and the layout will be signaled and all of that. So, this is just kind of the first entry into fiddling around with all that.
Yeah, that's right. So I know there's guys that have gone to the nth degree. Gordy Robinson, I don't know if you've probably heard of him, I think. So young Gordy. Yeah.
I know quite well.
Yeah, I had him on the show a few weeks ago now. So he's a cracking lad, as I would call it. Sorry for the Australian slang, but yeah, we had a lot of fun, and he's put a bug into me that I'm going to be ever annoyed at him about, because we're going to start looking at virtual operations. So I know he does that via JMRI. That's just another whole beast in itself. So I was just playing around with that yesterday as we speak, actually. So trying to set up the server correctly on my layout. So
yep.
Yeah.
I think Martin Jenkins was doing that as well.
He is. Yep. I got him up in about 2 weeks' time. He's from my part of the world. So a little bit about 12 to 14-hour drive southeast of me. He is. So
oh wow,
a little bit of a trek, but in the same continent anyway. So that's always a good start. So
I keep forgetting how big Australia actually is.
Yeah, it's enormous. There's sort of you can sort of get out of 3 or 4 hours out of anywhere in the coast, and then there's just nothing. So, but it's very vast, very vast. So it's a bit like, probably the way to describe it, like your Nevada desert, I suppose. That sort of very in the middle of nowhere, very, very barren and harsh environment. That's for sure. So, so you touched on it briefly in regards to motive power, that you wanted diesel other than steam. So how did you define, because you've got a reasonably defined period here, I think 1962 to 1967, I think I read somewhere. So how did you sort of come up with that time period, I suppose?
Well, it always comes back to going to the prototype. And there were several years ago, there were these really good books that were written by a guy named Dale Woodland, who is a Reading historian, and he came up with these really well-researched books about Reading diesels.
Yeah.
And it had in those books, it had a chronology of when the different types of locomotives arrived on the railroad.
Right.
And 1962 was really when the second generation power started to arrive on the Reading with the GP30 locomotives. And then in 1967, a lot of that's when the Reading purchased all of its 6-axle heavy power, the C630s, the SD45s, and the U30Cs.
Right.
So setting the layout at least in 1967 would allow me to include those big locomotives.
Yeah.
And then I actually moved the layout forward to 1973, 1974, and that's when the Reading bought its last new locomotives, which would have been the GP39-2s, GP40-2s, the MP15 switchers, and the SW1001 switchers. So by modeling, that early 1970s period right before Conrail, I can have examples of all of the different Reading motive power that's now, most of it's available commercially now from the manufacturers. I mean, there's been a real renaissance of having really high quality, ready to run motive power, from Bowser, from Athearn, from Atlas, all the major Kato, which saves you the hassle of painting. So that's really kind of why I landed on the time period I did.
Fair enough. That's, I suppose being the Pennsylvania Railway, or not the Penn Central, obviously that's long gone, but it's interesting you bring up about the ready-to-run stuff. I think that's where one of the leaps and bounds in this hobby has definitely come to the fore, I suppose. I wouldn't call myself a rivet counter, and I'm not sure whether you fit in that line, but I think that the detail of these locomotives and how they run and the rolling stock of today, I can't possibly see where there's got to be a point where can we get them any better? That's
I think we're getting pretty close to that
yeah,
point, quite frankly. I mean, some of the stuff that I've seen lately is just, is just phenomenal, both in terms of, the level of detail, the thinness of, like the grab irons and the lift rings and the railings, and
yeah,
the crispness of the paint, how well they run, the
yeah, sure,
sound. I
yeah,
mean, think about where sound was, even 5, 10 years ago,
yeah,
and
that's
to
right,
where it is today. It's crazy.
yeah, that's
So,
right,
I mean, I don't consider myself a rivet counter. The things that I look for, uh, obviously locomotives, it's kind of easier to be accurate because,
sure,
they're made ready to run. But
that's right,
where I in terms of rolling stock, where my standards are, is the piece of rolling stock accurate for the time that I'm modeling? So for example, was it built before the early 1970s?
yeah,
You
okay,
know,
yeah,
or
sure,
did it exist? Did that boxcar first emerge in 1978? Well, if it did, then it can't be on my layout.
yeah,
Um, is the road number right for the type of car? Is the road number for a 50-foot car and it's actually a 40-foot car? Well, that's a problem if it's wrong.
yeah,
So
sure,
it's things like that. It's as I've done more and more research and learned more and more about the prototype,
sure.
I find things that bug me, but at the same time, it's like, it's kind of like pick your battles,
Well,
you
that's
know?
right. Yeah, it's we've only also got so much time to be able to do what we want to do as well. So, and
Exactly.
that's it. I know some people don't like it when I say this, but sometimes good enough is good enough, if that makes sense. So
hmm
it's
Yeah,
like the it's like the 3 foot
very
rule.
much.
Yeah,
Yep. No, I very much adhere to the good enough policy.
yeah,
You have to, or I mean, if you're, I guess the way I look at it is, you know, if you're building, a shelf layout, maybe around on one wall, or, doing like a corner or something, then you have the time, because this is a lifetime hobby, right? Then if you're building a layout with a smaller footprint, then you have the time to detail it to the nth degree,
correct.
and go to the extreme in the detailing. For a
Sure.
layout like I'm building, if I want to stand a reasonable chance of having it built, scenic, and operational in my lifetime,
Yeah, that's
there's
right.
going to be places where I'm going to have to compromise, and I'm
Correct.
okay with that.
Yeah, correct. Correct. I'm sort of at that point now. I've just recently got into. You might ask why a European model is building American craftsman kits, but it just seems to be. I'm very much sort of the other way, very freelance, proto freelance, the other side, I suppose, part of
hmm
the pendulum. So I'm sort of, if I like the look of it and it sort of fits in what I want to do, I think go for it. So I've just been getting into some Carolina craftsman kits and railroad kits and the like, and I just love
hmm
building them. They're just plastic kits to me are not as much of a challenge, I suppose, one of a better phrase. But I think moving forward with them, they're just a lovely kit to build, and I've got one coming along now that I'm going to put in my harbour scene, which is I'll slowly put photos up when I build it. But so it's just one of those little things that I like getting into. Um,
And craftsman kits, we were actually having this conversation last week. Craftsman kits, a lot of people, and I know I myself was, craftsman kits, um, people seem to be intimidated by them.
yeah,
I guess because it's wood, and the the walls are in parts that you have to put together.
Yeah.
It's not like a plastic kit. But honestly, once you go through it step by step, and if you read the instructions and if you
Correct.
follow the instructions and you're patient and you're careful, once you get one or two under your belt, they're really no more difficult than a good plastic kit.
Nah, you're exactly right there.
They're
It's just one extra step. Obviously, is the bracing up all the walls before you, which I found out the hard way, but so they don't warp. But we got there eventually. So no, I totally agree with you. There's some really good sort of Facebook pages out there, the Craftsman Courtyard and the like, and you can actually I've never come across a group of people where you can actually literally email or message the owner and the builder or the manufacturer of these kits and get first-hand advice from them. There's not too many companies around that do that, and I've said it once, I'll say it again, I need to take my hats off, your Jeff Groves, your Jimmy Dignans, and all those lads that are building these kits, Ron Kleiss from Mine Mount Models and the like, but just phenomenal kits and a lot of fun to build, really, really good fun to build.
Yeah, it's a how can I say this? It's definitely, there's like a sub community of the Craftsman kit guys within the larger hobby.
Yeah.
But they are all, really, willing to share information about techniques
definitely.
and offer tips and pointers, and it's, like I said, there's no need to be intimidated by it.
No, that's right. So, yeah, I'll throw myself at them, and I love building them. So, just, and do they fit a European modelling scene? Probably not. Do they fit in my harbour scene? Definitely. So, I build them. So, but anyway. I've got, it's called Realising the Reading document that we talked about before. I think I might just pop that up on screen because it's a fantastic document. As I said, I'll link to it below for people to have a read of if you're happy with that, Tom. So
sure.
So the first part of it is the principles of the modelled locales. I found fascinating. So we're looking at the Reading Yard, the Lebanon Valley, and I'll flip through them as you talk about them. So can we talk about the Reading Yard and what the purpose of it on your layout will be?
Yep. Well, Reading Yard was, on my layout, it's kind of the hub. It's the largest yard on the layout. It's going to be the main classification yard. On the prototype, it was also where the Reading's main locomotive and freight car shops were. So this is where Reading Steam Power was built. A lot of Reading built a lot of its own rolling stock, and so that all went on here. So it's basically, it's a large classification yard. Trains will originate from here. Trains will also stop here to make set outs and pickups, and so it's going to be a pretty busy location on the layout. Because it's really the hub of the entire Reading system is Reading and the yard there. That big, if you look at the slide, that big concrete structure in the background, that's the coal dock from for the steam locomotives. And that stood until about 1985, 86, somewhere around there.
Right. Okay.
It was after steam went out, that was where they had a fuel rack and a sand rack for diesels. But when Conrail decided to tear that down, it was so well built that they actually had to dynamite it. The wrecking ball would not work.
Wow.
But
just bounced off. Fantastic.
But I have plans to actually kit bash a Walther's coaling tower into something resembling that for the, not so much operational, but more as an atmospheric thing.
Yeah. So obviously a little bit closer up picture there, the bottom right, you might not be able to see that, Tom.
Yeah, I can see it.
You
You
can see
can
that?
see that that was kind of the ready track for the diesels then
Sure.
in later years.
Yeah, sure.
And then that other concrete building, that is the Spring Street Yard office that is actually still standing, and that's used by Norfolk Southern today.
Right. Okay.
So that's kind of an advantage that I have in that so much of the physical plant is still around. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot that's gone, but there's a lot that's still there because Norfolk Southern still uses the line and it's so active
Yeah, sure.
that I'm able to go see firsthand and get some info and data that I need.
Yeah, that's
So there on this slide, you've got a nice aerial view. You can see that black and white photo to the right. You can see the classification yard, but then these buildings in the top in the center, the building in the middle, that was the freight car shop.
right. Okay.
And then the buildings at the right, those were the locomotive shops.
Wow.
Where they repaired locomotives, they built steam locomotives in there. So you can see kind of how large this was,
Yeah.
how the facility that this was. And then this small, it looks like a switch tower, but this was actually the yard office at the north end of the yard. It was
Right.
called the water
Okay.
station for some
Right.
reason. So,
Yeah, okay.
and that stood well into the Conrail era also.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing when I first saw the photo, the black and white, how large those shops are. If you can have a look at some of these little hoppers down the bottom here, and then try to transpose how many of those you'd actually fit in there. It's just enormous.
Yep.
All right, so Lebanon Valley Junction. So this is where your CTC machine comes into play as well, I would think. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This was, and it still is actually, an interlocking on the outskirts of Reading, and basically this was where the belt line that ran up to Beltline Junction connected in with the Lebanon Valley line heading west to Harrisburg.
Right.
And that
okay.
was controlled in this tower.
Sure.
The tower is still standing, but it's long boarded up. But this is essentially, I mean, I'll be modeling this tower and this junction. But it's like I said, it's no longer operational, but the building is still there.
Sure. Now, did I see you? Was that the one you were mocking up with the laser printer that you've got? Is that building?
No. What I was mocking up with the laser was the Cornwall Railroad office at the yard in Lebanon.
Sure.
But eventually, I'm sure I'll use the laser for this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. So these are just some more shots. This train
Valley.
At the top is actually coming into Reading from the west.
Right. Okay.
And the one down at the bottom, is coming off the Lebanon Valley line and heading toward Philly.
Oh, I see. Yep. Sure.
Underneath the tower, underneath that bridge.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yep. Sure. If it's going to let me scroll. There's the bridge that you speak of, and I'm assuming that will be pride of place, being a lovely structure as it is.
That is actually our next big project once we get all this wiring complete, figuring out how we're gonna build that. I mean, we know where it's gonna go, but we need to figure out how we're gonna build it.
How long is that bridge in prototype?
Oh, it's long.
Yeah.
Couple thousand feet maybe.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's pretty long.
And just some more branch lines coming on the Lebanon Valley.
Yep, this is just that was just the Lebanon Valley. Just you can see it goes through a lot of farmland, a lot of rural area, a lot of fields, farms, all that good stuff.
Yeah, okay. And obviously we get coal rake coming in, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. The Reading didn't only deal with anthracite, but the Reading moved a lot of bituminous coal that came up from places like Maryland, West Virginia, that area, the Appalachians,
Sure.
came up to feed the blast furnaces at Bethlehem Steel.
Oh, I see.
So
Okay.
there was a lot of soft coal, coming onto the Reading as opposed
Yeah.
to anthracite being shipped out.
Right. Okay.
And then we get to, you can see here, this is Lebanon. Um, and the passenger station that you see in this top photo is actually still standing. After it was a train station, it was a bank for a number of years. It's
Yeah.
now
Okay.
closed, but it's still standing. But it's very ornate. It's very
Yeah.
intricate. One of my modeling buddies actually has a set of blueprints for the station,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and if I can ever twist his arm enough to let me borrow them and scan them,
Sure.
that'll let me you know take a crack at modeling that with the laser.
Yeah. Okay. Oops. That's gone a bit far. All right, as we spoke about before, the sweetest place on earth, as you've called it, the Hershey Chocolate Bar. So
Yep.
it's a chocolate factory, I should say, not just the bar, but the
Yep.
whole factory.
Yep, that's the factory there in the top, and then in the bottom photo, the building there, the buildings to the left there, those are the cocoa bean silos.
Oh, wow.
They're made out of concrete, and it was actually one of the things I've learned in my research and information from some fellow modelers is that apparently the beans from different countries, they were mixed in different proportions to get the different flavors of chocolate.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, so when you're unloading the beans into the dump house where they were dumped and conveyed into the silos,
Sure.
certain silos only held, for example, beans from Africa, or
Right.
another silo might have. So, that adds a whole other element of operational interest, that when the crews work in there, they need to make sure that they put the right box cars on the right track
Yeah.
to, get the beans in the right place.
Yeah.
So, just, a lot of little interesting details like that you
Yeah.
find when you're doing
You can
all this
start digging.
prototype research
That's,
that can
yeah.
really make the operations interesting.
That's right. No chocolate bars for them if they get that wrong. So
Right, right. I'm gonna
that's
need to have like a bowl of candy or something
that's
at that
right.
location. Every train that goes by, the engineer takes a
Yeah.
Hershey kiss or
That's
something.
right. That's fantastic. I wouldn't have even thought that's what. I suppose it makes perfect sense because we're a big wine industry over here, and obviously different grapes from different regions within this state of South Australia is different flavour. So it
Mhm.
makes perfect sense if it comes from a different part of the country or the world, it's going to have a different flavour. So it makes perfect
Right.
sense. The Johanna Turn.
Yep. This is an interesting. It's not a long run, but it's actually a very interesting run. There was a branch that came out of Reading that ran down to Wilmington, Delaware.
Sure.
And off of that branch, there was a short spur that led to the Grace Mine, which was an iron mine that was owned by Bethlehem Steel.
Right.
So there was a turn job that would run down there in the morning, would pick up a train loaded with iron ore,
Yeah.
bring it back to Reading, and then leave in the evening and run up to Bethlehem, dump the ore, and come back with empties for the next day. And that ran every day. It was just this endless cycle of loaded ore, picking up loaded ore,
Yeah. Wow.
taking it
Okay.
up to Bethlehem, and bringing the empties back.
Yeah.
And in the first generation days, they used the RS3s like you see
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
But in the time that I'm modeling, actually Bethlehem Steel helped the Reading purchase its GP40-2 locomotives, and those were
Right.
actually dedicated to this service.
Wow. Okay. So that's coal, did you say, or iron ore?
Iron ore.
Iron ore. Okay. Yeah, we're
Yep.
used to some rather large iron ore trains in the west of this country anyway, where they'll run with 6 or 7 locomotives on some of them. I remember seeing one that they come from a place called Port Hedland in Western Australia through to one of the mines about 200 k's east of that, and they're just enormous trains, like just kilometres and kilometres and kilometres long. They're just phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, iron ore is so much heavier than coal.
Correct.
So the Reading built these 100-ton capacity hoppers that you see here, and you see them loaded, and there's just piles of iron just over the trucks and the hopper chutes. They're not loaded all the way up to the top. There'd be no way to move them if they were. So, just an interesting dynamic. And what you're seeing here, I actually had Bowser produce a custom run for me of these 100-ton hoppers. Yep. Cool. So I actually had a run of 200 made. I kept 50 for myself and sold the rest, which of course financed having them done. So
okay. So they're prepared to sort of take on a job. I suppose they've got to make their money out of it, and obviously you're paying a lot more per unit there. But if you can sell some on, that's great.
That's it. It worked out. It was one of those break-even deals.
Yeah.
And basically what I did was I had most of the artwork printed on the car except for the numbers. That way, whoever bought them, they could put whatever numbers they wanted on them.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So I just did a little Google search just quickly. That train that I was telling you about over my part of the world, the longest train they've run was 289 hopper wagons. So I've just done a conversion from kilometres. It's 2.8 kilometres, 2.9 kilometres long, which is 1.8 miles. This train was in length. And I remember watching one of these take off in their yard up at Port Hedland, and it's just like, oh my goodness, it's just like went and went. You could hear the locomotive go, and by the time it pulled the slack up on all these wagons, it was minutes and minutes and minutes later. It was just like, and by the time it starts going, and there's one part of the line where it's actually remote control, radio controlled train. So there's no one actually on it.
Okay.
And one got away from them, and they had to tip it over. Caused all sorts of problems. So
it would do that.
Yeah, definitely. So Beltline Junction.
Yep. And I think as I said earlier, this is where the line coming in, the East Penn coming in from Allentown, and the main line coming down from the coal region converged.
Right.
And in this photo, the tracks to the right of the photo actually went into Reading Yard, down toward the bottom, and then the tracks on which this locomotive is coming from actually went on to the Beltline, which essentially ran around Reading and connected at the other end of town. Right. It was basically a means for trains to avoid the grade crossings and things and the congestion of the yard. It basically just was a bypass to the yard itself.
Yeah, okay.
But still a very busy junction on NS today, and a very, very popular railfan spot.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot going on there, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So you're modelling a summer.
I haven't. We haven't started any scenery yet, so I haven't actually decided on a season.
Sure.
I probably will do summer. Just because that's what everybody seems to do. Although I do love layouts that do fall scenery well.
Yeah. Okay.
It can be very hard to do convincingly.
Sure.
But somebody like Mike Confalone and his Allagash, when he models what they call mud season in New England, where it's not quite winter, but it's not quite spring.
Yeah, sure.
It can be a really amazing effect, but it really takes effort and discipline to do it.
Definitely.
Right. I'll probably just do summer with lots of green. trees and all of that,
Yeah. It's a lot easier getting the stuff, and obviously that's obviously a bit more of a winter scene on that photo there, but I've tried winter
Yeah.
scenes and they're rather difficult, so...
Yeah. Well, and too, with the railroad, with my layout, it's going to run through so much farm country and so much
Sure.
farm fields. Doing summer is when all the crops are up, when the
That's
corn's high
right.
and all of that. So,
Visually more
that's more,
pleasing, definitely. So
it's going to be a better visual effect, I think.
So we're looking at Fleetwood, the East
Hmm.
Pennsylvania branch.
Yep, this was a town that was about halfway between Reading and Allentown, and again, still very active on NS. The building in the top photo in the back is the FM Brown's feed mill, large feed mill, grain elevator. And then down at the bottom, that building was the original Fleetwood Auto Body Works, where they
Right,
made the
okay.
Fleet Cadillacs way
Oh,
back
okay.
when.
Wow, okay.
Yep. So it's still standing. It was actually used by a tannery at one point.
Right.
So, both of those will be on the layout. They're still standing today.
And the last but not least, so...
Yep. This is Albertus.
Albertus. Excuse my pronunciation on that. So
That's okay. No worries. So this is, you can see here, as I said earlier, Albertus was a junction between the East Penn Main Line and what they called the Catasauqua and Fogelsville branch that
Sure.
ran up into the cement region. And this was the tower that controlled that interlocking. And then down at the
Right.
bottom, you have the passenger station.
Right. Okay.
So the tower's long gone, but it's still going to live on my layout.
Oh, definitely.
Yep. And this is still, again, this is another busy location on NS.
So this is the construction of the sub
of the raised floor.
The raised flooring. Yep. So
yeah, this is the raised floor, which is actually 30 inches high.
Right.
And what we did here is it's basically just a bunch of little stud frames that are connected together, and then we ran joists on top of that framework, and then the flooring on top of the joists.
Right.
Now, the floor is free floating. Okay, it's not connected to the walls or the floor of the building.
Okay.
And the other thing that we did is when we built the benchwork for the layout benchwork does not touch the floor system anywhere.
Right. Okay.
And what that does for us is it eliminates the transmission of any vibrations.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to ask why that you did that, but that makes perfect sense.
I can stand on that floor and I can jump up and down, and I'm a big guy.
Yeah.
I can jump up and down on that floor and nothing will move on the layout.
Yeah, okay.
So we thought about that, early on. And it's paid dividends, because when we have 3 or 4 guys in there working and clomping around, nothing moves or tips over on the layout, which is important when you're operating.
Yeah, sure. Now, what sort of operations are you going to look at doing? So, like prototypical operations.
Well, I've been very fortunate in that in all of the research I've done on the Reading over the years, I've been able to get my hands on the actual freight schedules for a number of different years. I think I have 68, 70, 72, 75. I have about 4 or 5 of these schedules. So, because of that, I know for all of the different through freights, I know, their departure and arrival times. I know which towns they stopped in to set off and pick up. I know what, primary freight they were hauling. So I'm able to replicate a lot of that. And I actually have some, a friend of mine, Jerry Britton, who models the Pensy. He actually did a string line diagram for me so that I could start planning how much, as I said earlier, how many trains will fit on the
Sure,
layout at a
sure.
time and things like that. So there's going to be a lot of through freights, because there was a lot of the Reading, that stretch of the Reading, like I said, it was a major
Yeah,
east-west
yeah,
freight artery. So there was a lot of through freights,
sure.
but there were locals that ran out of Allentown. There were locals that ran out of Rutherford. There were
Right.
locals that ran out of Reading. So we'll have a good mix of way freights and through freights. And
Yeah, that's lovely.
then, as I think I said earlier, at Hershey, Hershey actually had a dedicated switch crew that ran there basically for 2 tricks a day.
Right.
And
Okay.
because there were trains coming in, dropping off and picking up. And I envision with, all of the switching that goes on at Hershey, there'll be a dedicated job there, for a switch crew that will do nothing but, pull empties, shift loads, all of that. So there's going to be, there's going to be varied operations, which
Yeah,
I
sure.
think is key to having a successful session, because most of the time in an operating session, guys will run, 3, 4 trains
Right.
in a session,
Yeah,
and
sure.
you want to have a nice mix of things for them to do.
Yeah, sure.
If you're just running a through freight from one end to the other, to me personally, it kind of gets boring.
Yeah, no, I agree with
I
that.
like to do switching along the way, or
Sure.
you know, setting off a block of cars in a yard and picking another block up, and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. So, I haven't really done any of the physical work to get that going. I haven't, started printing off any waybills or
Right.
or anything like
Yeah,
that.
sure,
But
sure.
um, but I kind of have a sense of where I want to go. It's just waiting until construction is at a point where we can actually start operating to actually make that stuff happen.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. Well, I've have no further questions, Tom. Is there anything else you would like to say? Anything else you would like to bring to our
Um,
attention? Or
I do have a Facebook page for the
yep,
layout,
sure.
and so if anybody is interested in joining that or looking at that, it is called Tom Jacobs 1970s Reading Company Crossline Layout.
Yep.
Um, I know it's a lengthy title, but it pretty much is what it is, right? It's mine, it's
Yeah,
the era, it's the railroad, and what it is.
sure.
So
And
you can find that on Facebook, and I try to update it at least weekly with whatever I've got going on.
sure.
And anybody's welcome to sign up
Come along.
to join.
Just to let you know, Tom, I've got a ticker running across the bottom with that information on it as well. So, and I'll put a link definitely in the description below for that. So, for anyone
Okay.
that's obviously listening in, that if you just type in Tom Jacobs, the rest will just pop up. It'll just propagate out naturally. It'll just come to the top. That's what I found on mine anyway. So it's good. I got a lot of information out. Some lovely photos that you can see scrolling through here on the slideshow. So, Tom, as I said, thank you so much. We obviously had a few false starts with issues with timings and the like, but I thank
Right.
you for you taking time out of your day to come and chatting with me at MRT here, and I look forward to having you on again. I'd love once we get going a bit further, maybe a layout tour where we can run around with a camera and sort of I can see
Sure.
firsthand. That would be great. That'd be really good viewing, I think, and I'd find that very, very interesting. So anyway, thanks
I'd
again.
be happy to do that.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for having me. Appreciate
great.
it.
Make sure you subscribe. Click that little bell icon to be notified of upcoming videos. Support us on Patreon. Like us on Facebook and Instagram at Model Railroad Technique.